This is Kitten Space Agency running on Linux. And this is Kerbal Space Program running on Linux. Is 2026 finally the year of the Linux desktop? The year where we liberate gaming from the clutches of Microsoft Windows? I decided to find out. And oh, I don't use Arch, by the way. Hello everybody and welcome. A couple of weeks ago I decided to finally do it. I slapped another drive into my computer, yes, in that economy, grabbed a USB stick and installed Ubuntu Linux on my main PC, the one I used to game, work and produce videos on. The goal was to completely replace my Windows environment since I don't like the direction Microsoft has taken the OS and I tend to cut companies and products out of my life that I can't ethically justify to use anymore. Which is also why I'm no longer active on Twitter, and neither should anyone be, especially in the space community, but that's maybe going to be a separate video one day. In this video, we'll talk about how I went about setting up my system, how I got Kitten Space Agency working, and what types of issues I encountered along the way. If you don't know yet, Kitten Space Agency is the unofficial spiritual successor to space simulation legend Kerbal Space Program, with a lot of the original developers working on KSA. And if that sounds interesting to you, check out my other videos and make sure you subscribe to this channel so I can keep you in the loop with that game's development. First things first, the choice of Linux distro. Depending on what flavor of the free open source operating system you choose, you will have to go about setting up your system differently. Debian, Fedora, Arch, Manjaro, Pop! OS, Nobara, Bazite, CachyOS or Mint. Depending on what distro you choose, installing and configuring your system and your applications will differ. So if you want to try out Linux, make sure you do a little research what you want to do before deciding on a distribution. I went with Ubuntu mainly for 3 reasons. First, I'm already familiar with it. I have used Ubuntu on a couple of servers in the past as well as my Windows subsystem for Linux, and it is currently the main OS on my laptop. Second, Ubuntu works with NVIDIA GPUs pretty much right out of the box, since I already saw enough tinkering on the horizon, and boy was there ever, I didn't want to deal with that right from the start. Third, the long-term support thing. I don't use the most recent Ubuntu, I am on 24.04.3 LTS. The idea behind that, once I get a configuration that actually works, I will be able to enjoy updates for it for quite some time before having to tinker with it again with a distro upgrade. I mentioned that I'm already familiar with Ubuntu, but that's not where my Linux experience started. My first contact with it was when I had a friend convert an old PC into a homemade router for me that ran SUSE Linux version 5. That was back in the 1990s. Yes, I'm that old. I then dabbled with other distros from time to time, including Mandrake, Red Hat, newer versions of SUSE and of course Ubuntu. I wrote my final thesis for university on a laptop running Linux using Kyle, a rather capable LaTeX editor. But even then, I'm nowhere near an expert in the field. Enthusiastic amateur, maybe. So how did it go for me? In many ways, better than expected. In others, well, not so much. Let's start with the thing that hopefully piqued your interest: running games on Linux. There's a lot of talk around how games can perform a lot better under Linux than on Windows, since you can circumvent a lot of the ballast that Microsoft operating system comes attached to. However, that was never anything I cared about. Games should just run at the playable performance. A couple FPS more or less than on Windows, I didn't care, and you won't see any benchmarks in this video, just my observations. Gaming on Linux nowadays wouldn't be where it is without compatibility layers. The reason being that most games are still produced for Windows and there is rarely a native Linux version around. Enter Wine and Proton. The former enables Windows applications to run under Linux without the need for a full-fledged virtual machine, while the latter is a gaming-focused fork of it and was developed by none other than Valve, the company behind Steam. If you already have installed Steam on your Linux system to play games, it will download and install the Windows version of a game that doesn't have a native Linux variant and run it with Proton in the background. And you can make use of Proton to add other Windows apps manually, especially when you combine it with something called Proton tricks. So that's what I did to get Kitten Space Agency running. The short version: I downloaded the setup file, added it manually to Steam, ran it using Proton, installed the game, then put that installation into Steam as well and ran it via Proton. If you want a more detailed tutorial how to do this, I will link you to this video by Pseudologic here on YouTube. He goes over everything you need in about 8 minutes, and while he is using an Arch-based distro, you can easily replicate everything he does on other Linux variants so long as you know how to install packages via the command line. Ah yes, the command line. It's 2026 and you still can't use Linux without a text-based interface. Okay, that came out bitter, but I'm honestly not. There are also situations in Windows where I prefer to use PowerShell instead of the graphical user interface. Sometimes you just need to grab a real tool, not a toy. While I went the Proton route, there are other methods. You could either use Wine directly or Lutris, which is a game manager that can handle multiple versions of Wine depending on which works with which game, or you can use Bottles, which does a similar thing and is designed not just for gaming but handling Windows apps in general. If you check out the One True Linux thread on the KSA forums, there are many people who managed to get the game running under Linux by either of these methods under various distros. So how did KSA run on Linux using Proton? Pretty well, to be honest. And yes, I recognize the irony of running the game via Steam, since developer Rocketworks don't want to distribute the game over Steam once they've completed it. Performance was comparable to Windows, and I was able to fly around, do some foolish stuff on Earth's surface, and travel to other planets, in this case Venus. But there were a couple of issues. First, it took longer to load, and since I like to play in windowed 1440p despite having a 3840 by 1600 pixel display, I got an ugly Windows 95 style frame around the game. Before exiting, I have to reset the game to full resolution and full screen, otherwise there are going to be issues and crashes the next time I load it up. But playable? Certainly. Enjoyable even. Same goes for Kerbal Space Program, alas with a couple of caveats. Yes, CCAN also runs on Linux and grabbing mods with it was as easy as ever, but I was not able to get KSP running with all of the mods I usually play with. The terrain improvement mod Parallax just refused to work reliably. There were a couple of exceptions in the log files when playing with it, and the game crashed constantly. And as you can see here, the rocket plumes for the skiff engine were drawn above the vehicle instead of inside the engine bell. That doesn't happen on the Windows version of KSP with the same mods. And there was this weird black line across the screen, but I got that even without any mods. A minor thing though, all things considered. Other games I tried out were Doom: The Dark Ages to really put the GPU under Linux through its paces, and Hollow Knight Silksong, so I could feel utterly inadequate at gaming. Seriously, that game is more punishment than fun. Multiple other games work well on the Linux, and the list of compatible titles, either native or through Proton, grows every day. So, smooth sailing all around? Is this the moment where I'm going to tell you that I can finally ditch Windows and put Microsoft and its growing anti-user behavior into the rearview mirror? Unfortunately, I'm going to rain a bit on our open source parade, and it is mostly related to me being a creative professional and the tools I need to do things like this video efficiently. Sure, most regular tasks on Linux work just fine. Web browser, email client, word processor, spreadsheets. All of this and even printing and scanning worked out of the box. Easy! And as I said, gaming? Totally fine most of the time. Recording my screen with OBS Studio was no hassle at all, as you can see throughout this video. Except for the one time where it just disappeared and I had to reinstall it. As for 3D printing, I got Blender and Prusa Slicer running without issues, which covers everything I need for that. But the more specific things you want to do and the more specialized your tools get, the harder it is to find equivalents for Linux or make the Windows versions of them run. Hurdle number 1. Davinci Resolve Studio, the video editing software I use. And which I paid for, I might add. Blackmagic Design, the company behind it, does have an official Linux version, but both the installation as well as using it is not on par with the Windows version at all. First up, the installation. Resolve is not available via the usual means. No snap, no flatpak, no integration into any package manager, be it apt, dnf, pacman or whatever your Linux distro uses to manage software. No, you have to download an installer from the Blackmagic website and manually execute it. And then of course there are problems, because there are suddenly dependency missings. You know, something a package manager would take care of. Even better, once you finally get it installed, it will refuse to launch. Why? Because there are 9 deprecated library files in the bowels of the Davinci Resolve installation that prevent it from starting. Delete those files, which in reality are just 3 actual libs, with the other 6 files just being links to those 3, and you're good to go. Well, at least Resolve attempts to launch, and it will take a long time until it offers you to enter your license information. Alright, finally inside I was able to import my project templates, but trying to relink them to where the files are currently residing was another hurdle, since the Blackmagic developers decided that nope, you can't define a path outside of your home videos folder to rink clips. What you can do is change the target folder, but still you can't browse to it if it's in another hard drive, like in my case. No, I had to manually copy the path and paste it. And I had to do it multiple times, since I have my template files in different folders. Alright, now we're good to go, right? Nope. Because what do you know? Even the paid version of Davinci Resolve is incapable of handling clips using the AAC audio codec. And guess what my old files were encoded with? So basically, to get Resolve working like it would under Windows, I would have to transcode my entire archive to a different audio codec. Which is possible, of course, but it takes time. And it shouldn't be necessary. I don't need to produce new videos with the AAC codec, I just need your software to play it back during editing. Oh, and there's another thing, you cannot resize the app's window. Full screen or nothing. There isn't even a button to minimize it. Multitasking is apparently not something that Blackmagic thinks video editors should do. Yes, you can make the window a bit smaller by holding the Windows key and dragging the app window, but you cannot change the aspect ratio. It's like full screen, but smaller. Great job, Blackmagic, that really screams professional software. Okay, I could probably work around these shortcomings even in the long term, but what about audio? I don't use Resolve to record my voice or produce music. I do this with a dedicated DAW or digital audio workstation called Reaper, which I also paid for, by the way. Reaper does have a Linux version, but like Resolve, it isn't available via the usual Linux software distribution methods. Nope, you once again have to manually download a file and run it. However, this one installed a lot smoother than Resolve. But I wasn't able to record anything without a ton of latency. Like more than a second using the default Pulse audio driver. Elsa only produced static garbage, and Jack, the preferred method, refused to launch at all. Again, the command line had to come to the rescue. I had to install Pipewire Jack and then launch Reaper by means of pwjack. Then Jack worked fine and I was able to use my audio interface with barely any latency. So far so good. But no audio production is worth anything without a couple of plugins to spice up the sound. And here is where everything collapsed for me. You see, I paid quite a lot of money for VST plugins. First, the RX suite by Isotope, then the Bias Effects guitar amp and pedal modeling software by Positive Grid, and in order to use my MIDI keyboard, I need to be able to run Arturio's Analog Lab software. The big problem? VST was developed for Windows. So basically you need to install them using something like Wine and then use a bridge software to get them working under Linux in your DAW, be it Reaper or something else. And so far I haven't had any success with that whatsoever. And this is the main reason I will not be able to switch to Linux full-time yet. Should I be able to get this worked out, then there is a chance. But until then, I am stuck with the AI-ridden bloated mess that Windows has become. If you're an audio person and use Linux, let me know in the comments if you managed to get VST or VST3 plugins working. I attempted Yawbridge, which didn't really work, but there's also LinVST and Carla, so I'm not completely done yet experimenting, I'm just tired of it right now. I might be stuck on Windows, but you don't have to be. If you don't have these special types of use cases that I have, or you are just starting out, you can try to hit the ground running with a full native suite of open source applications. KDE and Live instead of Resolve, Ardor instead of Reaper, OnlyOffice or LibreOffice instead of Microsoft Office. As I said, the basic OS functionality is absolutely there, and there are a myriad of fantastic Linux apps out there that will work out of the box. But you need to be willing to tinker with your system and not be afraid of the command line. For instance, setting up temperature monitoring and fan curves is a lot more hassle, especially if you run a gigabyte motherboard like I do. They don't have Linux drivers for their fan controllers, so the community reverse engineered some of their own, but you have to manually install those. Otherwise, your fan control software will not show any fans at all. And there is no out-of-the-box RGB control. It's either Rainbow Puke or you have to use OpenRGB, which seems to have some issues of its own. Oh yeah, and it turned my PC into a strobe light at one point when I wanted to shut it down. The real problem is not Linux. Linux is great. The problem is the software ecosystem surrounding it. Competing package managers, competing app distribution systems like Snap and Flatpak, companies that produce subpar Linux versions of their paid professional software. I'm especially looking at you, Davinci Resolve developers. Or no Linux version at all, like the entirety of the professional audio production industry. It's been almost 20 years since I started working on my thesis using Linux. I was able to do so back then, and it's easier than ever to work with Linux now. The more people switch to it, the higher the incentive for software companies to provide actual support for it is going to be. Tell me, are you already using Linux? Do you plan to? If so, what is your use case and what do you expect from switching to it? Let me know in the comments below. Right now, Windows still owns 2/3 of the desktop OS market, with macOS and OS X collectively coming in at around 12%, with Linux at barely 4%. Guys, those are rookie numbers. Let's pump them up a bit. I want Linux to succeed and take a bigger share of the desktop market pie. But it won't without support, both from you as users as well as companies. And the latter will follow where you are going. So don't dunk on each other if someone else is not using your favorite distro. Instead, help each other make the most of what you have in front of you. If you create a market, someone will come in to serve it. And if this video has served you well, either by being informative or entertaining, or maybe both, you can support my channel by leaving a like, a comment, maybe even use the hype function or drop a super thanks. And if you really enjoy my content, make sure you check out my Patreon, where you can watch all my videos ad-free for a small contribution, either monthly or per video. And on the higher tiers, your name will show up here, together with all of these wonderful people. Thank you so much for your support. I really, truly appreciate it. While my first foray into Linux wasn't completely successful, in many respects I got a lot further than I expected, and I will continue trying to make it work despite there still being a couple of obstacles. Are you interested in an update to this journey? If so, let me know in the comments. No reason to spend time doing a video about this if you don't care about it, is there? What I care about now is getting in a few more laps under my belt in KSA. And by laps, I mean orbits around all the different planets and moons in the game. So see you out there in space.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.